Why does working with some people feel so much harder than others? I used to think that it was just personality clashes or different work styles, but then something happened that made me realize that the real problem was often much deeper, and it was entirely in my own head. Hello, I'm Helen Bryant. I'm a leadership coach, and I help ambitious managers like yourself accelerate their leadership skills and achieve their career goals faster. And over the last 20 plus years of leading teams and coaching managers, I've seen this pattern destroy more working relationships than any other leadership blind spot. Most team problems aren't personality clashes, they're assumption problems. The thing is, we all think we're pretty self-aware. We think we see people clearly, but our brains are constantly taking shortcuts, filling in the gaps with assumptions based on past experience, first impressions, and frankly, sometimes complete rubbish. And for managers, this isn't just an awkward thing, it's career limiting. So I'm going to share a story with you about how deep assumptions can go. So back in 2019, I broke my hip. I was in an exercise class, one of those park fit things. I had my right leg behind me on a raised up thing, and I was doing lunges. And all of a sudden I had this pain shoot from kind of my waist all the way down my leg. And I went, oh, gosh, that hurt. And I kind of shook my leg and the pain disappeared. Over the following 2 weeks, the pain in my leg just got worse and worse. I was in a lot of pain and it was really uncomfortable, but, just taking paracetamol and ibuprofen. I booked into the GP and my husband drove me down there and explained what had happened. And the doctor said, what you've probably done is rip a muscle. I was like, oh, right. She goes, so what we'll need to do is we can get you a scan of that. But first, just to make sure, why don't you go and get an x-ray? So I went off to the little local small hospital just nearby. I went in, I walked into the x-ray room, hobbled away, got on the thing, lifted my leg up, and I was lying there. And then the radiologist came out and said, you have a broken hip. And my brain just could not compute this. It was like, well, I haven't fallen over. How have I possibly broken my hip? With that, I was in an ambulance and I was off to a local regional hospital where I was going to have an operation. And when I was in A&E, a doctor came up to me and was asking how I did this, and I told him. And then he said to me, okay, so you didn't fall over? I said, no, I didn't fall over. And then he said, sometimes people get drunk and they fall over and they forget about it. Could that have happened to you? And I kind of laughed and went, no, that didn't happen to me. And he went, well, it happens. And I said, I'm sure it does, but it didn't happen to me. And with that, he went off. I never saw him again. I was now drugged up, feeling a lot better than I had been. I had the operation. The morning after the operation, the orthopedic surgeon came round and he had all these trainee doctors with him. So they were all gathered round my bed and he was explaining to them what he'd done and everybody's admiring his handiwork. And just as he was going out, when they have the curtains round you, just as if he was going out, he said, and stop drinking. And with that, he walked out. And I was like, what does he mean by that? And I couldn't quite work it out. But, he'd gone and there was no one to ask. So I was just like, oh, well, and I was a bit high on the drugs. Life went on. I got home about 4 to 6 weeks after the operation. I had to go back to outpatients to have it checked out. And I was in with the doctor there. Just as I am walking out the door, he says to me, and stop drinking. But by this point, I was kind of out the door because just as I walked down the corridor, this penny dropped. I thought, flipping heck. That A&E doctor has said I've been drinking. That's how it's happened. And that's why they all keep saying this to me. Now we're at 10, 12 weeks. I go back for the sign-off with the final meeting in outpatients, in with another doctor who, true to form, says, and stop drinking. At which point I said, why does everybody keep asking me that? He immediately looked completely uncomfortable. And I said, does it say that on my file? That this was caused through falling over from drinking? He looked massively uncomfortable. And I said, because I told the doctor at the time that was not true. That didn't happen to me. And he just didn't know where to look. Because I was a bit annoyed because I was thinking, oh, these people think I drank. And nobody is actually exploring why my hip broke. When you think about this, those assumptions in that situation came from two sources. The first was me. How did I possibly walk around for 2 weeks on a broken hip? Because I was telling myself it was a pulled muscle. I was managing on paracetamol and ibuprofen because I genuinely believed it was a pulled muscle. And when it got really painful, I'd kind of breathe through it and just go, I just need to rest it more. I am convinced that assumption helped me manage the pain and deal with that situation until it was proven to be completely incorrect. The second is obviously with the doctor. I can appreciate that that doctor was very busy, and that often is the cause of why people might fall over, but it wasn't my experience. But his assumption drove consequences because he wrote that onto my file. Everybody on that journey after that viewed me through the lens of somebody who had been drinking and fell over and forgotten about it, which just wasn't true. And nobody asked the questions for me to connect at the time what they thought. So this idea that assumptions are just thoughts is really important to recognize. They're not just thoughts, they drive consequences. So what can you do so you don't fall into this trap and you do indeed maintain a more strategic mindset? Well, first, your mindset is critical. You're not just managing tasks, you are managing relationships and perception. So you need to be curious, you need to be open-minded and not be judgmental. You need to ask yourself, what stories could you be telling yourself about other people or situations that may not be true? And what if the opposite were true? And when somebody behaves in a way that may frustrate you and your brain shoots to wanting to explain it quickly, they're being difficult, they don't care, they're not a team player, stop, take a breath and ask a question instead. Find out what they think about a situation. Most of the time, what looks like resistance is actually uncertainty, overwhelm, or missing information. And this isn't just about your direct reports. Managers spend half their time working with other departments, and this is where assumptions can really damage or influence. The person from the finance team who's always says no, they might be protecting you from compliance issues that you don't understand. The colleague who seems to ignore your emails, they might be juggling 5 urgent projects that you're not aware of. But in order to do this, you need good systems to support your mindset shift. You have to give yourself time to think and plan, ideally each week. Now, I know that sounds impossible when you're drowning in meetings, but even 30 minutes on a Friday afternoon to think and plan when you can reflect on team dynamics can change everything. As a consequence of building in thinking time, you become more willing to have better conversations. You pick up the phone, you ask questions, you get curious about what's really happening instead of filling in the gaps with your own stories. And here's why this matters for your career progression. When you stop making assumptions and start asking questions, you become the manager people want to work with. You become the one they come to with problems. You become the one who gets invited into the bigger conversations. That's strategic leadership in action, and it starts with getting out of your own head. And the key to making this work is consistently breaking out of reactive mode and creating protected time to think and plan. That's exactly what my Manager OS course teaches you, how to build the complete system that gives you space for strategic thinking, better conversations, and stronger relationships. Because when you have the right frameworks in place, leading becomes easier, not harder. And if you want to break out of reactive management and build the systems that support your own success, I'd check it out. And if this resonated, there's a video right here about the exact system I use to turn reactive managers into strategic leaders. And I'll see you there.